Hey there, Jeff Manchester, Manchester Music. In this video, I want to talk about inspiration, where it comes from, how it informs the cues that you write, where you get the ideas and motivations to start writing music when you're asked to write something or when you just want to write something for yourself. What I'm going to do is try and give you some out-of-the-box ideas for albums and records and songs and artists that you should get into if you're writing stuff that's mood-based and ambient, if you're writing stuff that's beat-oriented, if you're writing stuff that's very grandiose. And I'm doing this because I think it's important to sort of shake the tree a little bit, switch up your listening habits. I find there's a lot of composers out there that feel like, I've talked to a lot of people that only listen to Zimmer, that only listen to Williams, that only listen to like Steve Reich or only listen to Philip Glass or whatever. And I think that, that's cool, but you have to sort of incorporate other flavors and styles and time signatures and just other voices to really make yourself the most diverse, rich sort of composer that you can possibly be. And there's so much to learn from people outside of the composing world. And I want to start by talking about a piece of music that changed my life. Just something that I'm not the same for having discovered. When I was in high school, I found this album because what I used to do is there's no smartphones, obviously. I would go into the library with my friend and we would look at Pitchfork in the very, very early days of Pitchfork and see what they were recommending, the best new music and all that stuff. And then we go to class and this one album came up. It wasn't even an album. It was a DJ mix. It was a kind of like a compilation, and it's called How to Kill the DJ Part 2. It's two albums. One side is called Espacio and one side is called Optimo, and it's named after a couple things. The duo's name is Optimo. I think it's from a Liquid track. Great band, by the way. You should check out. But the CD reflected their experience at this club on Sunday called the Sub Club, and they would have the Espacio event, which would be a sort of ambient mood establishing set of weird and wonderful songs. And anyone who has been to the Sub Club back when Optimo were doing their thing, you would know that it goes the Espacio side, and then they would have a band that would play, I think, for exactly 30 minutes. And then once the crowd was good and riled up and like liquored up, they would do the Optimo side, which was the sort of loud, crazy dance portion of the night. And they would do this Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, and it just blew up and exploded. I don't know how, a couple magazine articles maybe, and it became this sort of a legendary night in Glasgow. I never got to go because I was in high school at the time and everything and didn't have any money to travel, so it sort of goes down in history. But this album, How to Kill the DJ Part 2, it is such a masterclass, and I try not to get too hyperbolic on this channel, but it literally changed my life. It changed everything about my life. It might be why I'm composing. It might be how I, in a weird way, got to Isotope and got into audio production and sound design and all the rest of it. I don't know, but it all really comes back to this album. So the Espacio side, mood establishing stuff, the Optimo side, sort of a party club vibe, but don't be afraid if you're not into dance music. It's not that. It's something so much more that I think, I can't talk about music and talk about my life and talk about composing without, paying homage and paying respects to the source. And I really think it all began with How to Kill the DJ Part 2. Just incredible musical education, and I owe an inestimable debt to Optimo, to those two guys, for getting me on this path, and that record did it. So without wasting too much time here on myself, I have a list. I have a sheet, which gets back to the early days of this channel when I was writing stuff down. So if you are being asked to compose beat-oriented stuff, rhythmic stuff, I think you have a lot to learn, believe it or not, from krautrock. So this is krautrock. I think was it's kind of like calling Daft Punk Daft Punk. Daft Punk was a band that got their name from a negative review in a magazine that called it was like stupid punk music or something. So they just loved it and they called themselves Daft Punk. Krautrock is the same thing, where you had a lot of Germans trying to make some version of rock and roll, and people discounted it as like, oh, it's krautrock. It's like, it's like lesser than rock and roll, but it was incredible. And if you're doing especially anything rhythmic, I would recommend the following records. So Neu, spelled Neu with an exclamation point, and it's the album that has white background and red coloring. This is a really important record. By the way, everything I'm talking about is going to be in the description, so just go there and click the links. Super important record. Rhythmically, it's a masterclass. Syncopated rhythms. Also, it's just like proto-minimal techno music. So minimal music is all about a beat that just sort of chugs along, and then every now and then something like this little minor thing is introduced, and because you've been so lulled and hypnotized by the beat, when that new thing comes in, it's all the more exciting and amazing, and then it comes back down, and then you're just waiting for that one little tweak, and that tweak is made all the more kind of exciting again because of the repetitive nature. It's amazing. And so Noise, Hallow Gallow, the lead track on that is incredible, and I think very important for people trying to establish a mood with beats or with rhythms. And I see some connective tissue between this record and a lot of stuff, especially from Sonic Couture, namely the, I forget what it's called, Euclidean Beats tool that they use. There's just something about krautrock and that record. And anyway, it's for me, it's very informative as a sort of beat making masterclass, that album specifically. The next thing would be Can, this record called Egg Bamiyashi or Bamiyashi, I'm not really sure. Another krautrock legend, that band. So that record in particular is incredible because it incorporates the best things about the krautrock scene. It mixes a little bit of jazz in there. It's an amazing album, and I find that we're seeing a lot of jazzy sort of Can-esque stuff come back now, especially with Sean Callery, the composer for Homeland. Homeland was just totally jazz informed. It was free jazz though, so it had this really sort of like I don't give a shit kind of vibe to it. And also Jessica Jones, he also composed for that show too. That also has a really cool jazz vibe. And I feel like that kind of music is coming back. And I believe Sonokinetic has a new library coming out probably next week or the week after that called Noir, which is, it sounds like it's going to be really jazzy and interesting. But anyway, Noe, Can, Egg Bamiyashi is amazing. I think jazz in general, if you're looking for inspiration with respect to establishing moods with beats and that sort of stuff, jazz in general, get into something really easy like Bitches Brew, Miles Davis, 1970. That record is great. I think you can learn a lot from krautrock, jazz, and find a way to incorporate that into your mood establishing stuff. So those three records, Bitches Brew, let's just say Bitches Brew, 1971 Noi, and that Can record, are incredible for that purpose. So with respect to if you're making any kind of animated music, if you're making any sort of Pixar-y stuff, very delicate, delightful music, I cannot recommend more this band called Penguin Cafe Orchestra. And these guys started out as a bit of a supergroup. They had something like 15 plus rolling members that would come in and out, and they don't have that many albums, but just go download like a best of and you'll hear right away that this music laid the foundation for, I think, a lot of music for advertisements. It's very economically arranged, the fat has been totally trimmed. It's all about melody and delight and creating this sort of joy in the music. And I hear it in Pixar. I hear it in Disney. I hear it in dog food commercials. I hear it everywhere. And I really think that it kind of started with them playing with very traditional instruments and also exotic instruments. So you'll hear cellos and harmoniums together. You'll hear auto harps, and then you'll hear, a string quartet, but it's all like tongue-in-cheek and fun, and again, economically arranged and written. So everything is very carefully detailed, but it also has this sort of like looseness to it. And I guess tracks that I would want to point you to out of the Penguin Cafe Orchestra would be Songs for a Found Harmonium, incredible. You'll have heard these things before. They're so embedded in like the subconsciousness of media composition. Yodel 1 is amazing. The Sound of Someone You Love Who's Leaving. I gotta find the right title for this. My computer just turned off. The Sound of Someone You Love Who's Going Away and It Doesn't Matter. That is a great song as well. Just go and download, I'm looking at Apple Music now, A Brief History. Penguin Cafe Orchestra is incredible. Let's see what else here. Pulse Dance, Air Dancer, Telephone and Rubber Band. I mean, these are all, Perpetuum Mobile is incredible. Air is incredible. Anyway, so just go do yourself a favor, check the description and just download that stuff. Find it. get inspired by it. It is, I think, again, the sort of proto Pixar stuff, and it's incredibly instructive, I think, for composers out there looking to delight and surprise people. A lot to learn from Penguin Cafe Orchestra. The next thing, moody, atmospheric stuff. If you ever have to establish a mood, especially a dark mood, a sort of brooding sort of atmosphere, there's a lot of tools out there like Omnisphere, and Dronar is out there too, and we're hearing a lot of that stuff sort of seep in now to a lot of film scores. I think that if you're looking to borrow or steal or get inspired by someone, I think you should really look to the post-punk and post-rock scene. And the band you should really focus your attention on is a band called Godspeed You Black Emperor. These guys were pretty badass. I think they came from Montreal. They'd show up in all black and they rolled their own cigarettes and were pretty, they didn't play a lot of shows, and they were pretty, mysterious on purpose before mystery was a part of, selling a record. These guys were it, Godspeed. They also have a record that I think came out maybe 4 years ago, which is pretty good. But go to these records, F sharp, A sharp, Infinity. Amazing mood establishing masterclass 101, incredible. I would also say the other one would be Lift Your Skinny Fists, is another great record. It's got this iconic sort of paper bag brown background and these two hands that are sort of like knobby and chapped that are kind of going like this. Just two incredible records for how to establish a mood and a tone in a very consistent and interesting way. That's the thing. The other thing I love about their music is, and my friend summed it up really well, it's like in all the despair and all the sort of negativity and depression and just the big black cloud that represented their sound, there was always hopefulness. There was always a light at the end of the tunnel. So I really love that about Godspeed. And I think for composers out there, there's a lot to learn from layering different drones and atmospheres, but in such a way that it's still interesting. And I think Godspeed, most post-punk and post-rock, like Slint, for example, go look up Slint. They're great too. We're really good at doing this and establishing a bit of like a what's going to happen next sort of vibe. They were really good at that. Another very left field, I think, record you should go to if you're looking to create moody, atmospheric stuff. And I'm hearing a lot of this with, especially the Gone Girl soundtrack. When, I hope I'm not spoiling anything, when Rosamund Pike's character was killing, what's his name? Neil Patrick Harris's character. A lot of the stuff coming from, what's his name? Trent Reznor and Atticus, especially in that scene, was very much this record by a guy called Sendai, Sendai. The record is called A Smaller Divide. This is not from the 90s or the 80s or the early noughts. This is a pretty recent record. Super instructive for me anyway, about just creating songs with nothing but noise and distortion and just like self-noise and the weird things that happen when you twist knobs at 2 a.m. on like an old synthesizer. This whole record is made up of that kind of vibe. Again, great for establishing mood and very atonal, obviously not a lot of melodies, blah, blah, blah. Sendai, an amazing record. Probably not something you want to pop into your ears and walk around the Apple Store with. It's pretty terrifying stuff, but I think it's great. Finally, I think for people who are getting into composing big, epic passages with a lot of chord changes, but also a lot of emotion and all this stuff, maybe they're doing some quiet, loud stuff where it gets very quiet and then it just explodes. Again, I think we have to look to post-rock and post-punk, and I think that we have a lot to learn from a band called Mogwai, again from Scotland. I don't know why this is a theme. There's a couple of songs and records that I think are going to be really instructive to people. I would point you guys to an album. It's about, I think it's like 30 minutes long, called My Father, My King. It's a riff off of, I think, an old Jewish folk song, and they managed to stretch it out into this incredibly epic masterpiece. And a lot of quiet, loud stuff. Mogwai sort of nailed this thing. By that I mean they would play a verse and it would just get quieter and quieter and quieter and lull you into this very false sense of comfort before it exploded. I've seen Mogwai a couple times. The takeaway from those shows is whenever you go, your pants are usually flapping if you're anywhere close to the speakers because they play louder than anyone. But it's not metal or anything like that. It's very organized. Epic sort of ambient rock, post-punk is the best way to describe it. So My Father, My King, like Herod Herod is an amazing song. Again, super instructive for big, epic orchestral music, I think. For people looking to just get into an album, I would say Government Commissions, which was a collection of songs they played at the BBC for the Peel sessions. That's really good too. You've got songs on there, maybe the best versions of those songs, like New Paths to Helicon 1 is on that, which is incredible. Stop Coming Around to My House is really good. That's on there too. If you want, you can go back to the early stuff. Come On, Die Young is a really good album too. They're one of those bands that's kind of evolved, and they've also found their way into a lot of film music, and I think that makes me feel better about recommending them to you, because those early records, those post-rock records, were already sort of talking in a language that's very similar to media composing, I think, that musically anyway. So it makes sense that now they're teaming up, doing like Leonardo DiCaprio, environmental documentaries with Trent Reznor and stuff like that. And one more thing, a track called Auto Rock. I think that showed up in a Michael Mann film when he redid, who was it? It was Jamie Foxx and Colin Farrell, Miami Vice. That was one of the tracks from that movie. And again, Mogwai sort of crawling up and now getting into the film composing space. It only makes sense. So I think, again, super epic, quiet, loud, orchestral, emotional stuff, Mogwai. Go to post-rock for moody stuff, atmospheric stuff, Penguin Cafe Orchestra. You cannot go wrong if you want to be inspired for creating even music for video games and apps and all that stuff. They wrote the book on how to do that, so really go in there. Don't steal, but steal some vibes, whatever. And I think krautrock, especially krautrock and jazz, for anything beat oriented, and we're seeing more and more, we're hearing more and more of that, especially with shows like the Marvel stuff on Netflix and all that stuff. It's very jazz influenced, especially if it takes place in New York. For some reason, they always go for like a hot jazz kind of vibe. So anyway, those are my picks, my influences. Not necessarily strictly those things, but I'm wondering, what are yours? Do you have any unconventional albums or CDs or just listening experiences that have found a way into the things that you compose? Or do you find that it's way more important for me, I'm talking as you, to stay within the confines of maybe some film music, stay within the Hans Zimmer stuff, or just, stay within, maybe go back to Baroque or classical or romantic music, Chopin or something. I don't know, whatever it is. I just want to know. I'm very curious. And if you have any sort of experiences with the stuff that I'm talking about, maybe there's some tracks that I haven't heard of that you would want to recommend from these guys. So anyway, again, everything's going to be in the description. Have a lovely day. Take care. Thanks for listening.